Think about a shooting range for a second.
Okay.
Imagine you can only see the targets after the shooting, covered in bullet holes.
Right, just the results.
Could you tell which team was, say, the most consistent? Whose shots had the least random spread? Without even knowing where the bullseye was.
Ah, that's a great analogy. And yes, you absolutely could.
Looking at figure 2, you can kind of see those patterns.
Exactly. That spread, that unwanted variability in where the shots land. That's really the essence of what we call noise in judgment.
Okay.
You can see how scattered the results are, how noisy, without even needing to know the truth, the ideal outcome.
Right, exactly. And that's really the core of our discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
Noise in human judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It's this factor that often gets, overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
We focus so much on bias aiming in the wrong direction, basically.
Yeah, bias gets all the press.
But the random scattering, the noise,
Mm-hmm.
it often just gets ignored.
It's really striking when you look at, the public conversation or even academic research. Bias is front and center.
Countless books, articles.
Right. How to fix our systematic thinking errors. But noise. Our sources point out it's often treated like this minor background thing.
Okay, so let's unpack why this imbalance matters.
Yeah.
Our goal for you today is really to bring noise into focus.
Mm-hmm.
We want to explore what it is, how it subtly messes with decisions, even ones that seem totally unique, and crucially, dig into practical ways to reduce it. In areas that matter, if you want to be well-informed, make better choices.
So this is your kind of direct route to understanding this really critical, often hidden aspect of how we decide things.
Definitely. So to really nail down that difference again, bias versus noise, back to the shooting range.
Let's do it. So Team A, maybe all their shots are tightly clustered, really close together, but way off, say, to the left of the bullseye. That's bias.
Got it. Consistent but wrong.
Exactly. Team C, maybe their shots are just all over the place. Some left, some right, high, low, a total spree pattern. That's noise.
Okay, so a lack of consistency.
Precisely. And both of them stop you from hitting the center reliably.
And it's not just that different people judge differently.
Yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. There's also this thing called occasion noise.
Ah, yes. That's the variability when the same person, or the same group even, makes different judgments about the exact same case, just on different occasions.
How does that even happen?
Well, what's fascinating about occasion noise is how easily it can creep in. Think about a group discussion.
Okay.
Research shows that something as apparently minor as who speaks first can disproportionately sway the whole conversation.
Seriously?
Yeah. So you could end up with different conclusions just based on the speaking order that day. Pure chance, almost.
Wow. Okay. Now let's switch gears slightly. Thinking about predictions, forecasting things.
Mm-hmm.
You'd naturally assume, I think, that the best forecasters are the ones with the deepest insights, the best to understand it, right?
That feels right, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
intuitive. But when you connect this to the idea of noise, well, something counterintuitive pops up.
Which?
The real strength of rules, formulas, even algorithms in forecasting, it isn't primarily because they have some superior crystal ball.
Okay.
It's because they are noiseless. They apply the same logic, the same process every single time. No good days or bad days.
Consistency again. They remove the human variability.
Exactly. That's a huge advantage. Of course, prediction isn't perfect.
Right, there have to be limits.
Absolutely. Our sources talk about this idea of objective ignorance of the future.
Yeah.
Meaning there are just some things we fundamentally cannot know in advance. Random events, unpredictable factors.
Okay.
And when you combine that inherent uncertainty with the noise in any human attempt to predict, well, it puts a natural ceiling on how accurate we can ever hope to be.
That makes sense. Okay, so noise seems clear when we talk about lots of judgments or forecasts over time. But what about those big one-off decisions?
Yeah, like a major strategic move for a company.
Exactly. Should we make this huge acquisition? Or even a personal one, like, is this the right house? Does noise even play a role there? It feels like a single point, not a spread.
That's a really critical question. And it's tempting, isn't it, to think noise just vanishes for those unique, singular decisions.
Yeah, because noise is variability, and how can you have variability with just one choice?
But think back to the shooting analogy. Even a single shot, its final position is still affected by how steady the shooter's hand was at that specific moment.
Ah, okay. So even if it's just one decision.
The judgment you actually make is just one possibility out of a whole cloud of potential judgments you could have made.
A cloud.
Yeah, influenced by tons of factors you might not even be aware of. Maybe different experts looking at the same data see different things.
Or how the information is presented.
Definitely. Or even your mood that day, the environment you're in. All these things can subtly nudge that single decision one way or another within that cloud of possibilities.
Huh. This makes me think about how often we just assume. Well, we assume that if one expert, say a doctor or an engineer, makes a judgment,
Mm-hmm.
that another equally qualified expert, given the exact same information, would come to the exact same conclusion.
Right. We expect consistency from professionals.
But that assumption,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's often wrong.
It very often is. The sources talk about something called a noise audit.
Okay, what's that?
It's basically a systematic way to measure just how much unwanted variability, how much noise there is in the judgments made within an organization.
And I bet the results can be a bit of an eye-opener.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources describe this insurance company. Executives there were genuinely shocked, really taken aback.
When they did a noise audit.
Yeah, it showed way more variability in their own professionals' judgments, things like underwriting risk or deciding on claim payouts, much more than anyone had anticipated.
Wow.
And one executive said something that really stuck with me. It's a quote: "We operate under the wrong assumption that another expert would produce a similar judgment."
That's, yeah, that's quite something. So it's not just minor differences.
Not at all. In systems with a lot of noise, those errors don't just magically cancel each other out. They add up.
And the consequences?
Well, they can be huge. Real financial losses, obviously, but also what the sources call rampant unfairness.
Unfairness. How so?
Think about it. Different doctors might diagnose or treat the same condition differently.
Right.
Court cases. You could have wildly different outcomes for similar cases depending on the judge.
Right.
Patent reviews, customer service interactions, unwanted variability, noise in any of these can have really serious unfair consequences for people.
Like two people getting vastly different sentences for basically the same crime, just depending on which judge they happen to get.
Exactly that. That's not about justice reflecting the crime. That's about the noise, the randomness in the judicial system itself.
Okay, so we get it. Noise is a big, often hidden problem. But how do we even start to think about measuring it or quantifying the error it causes?
Well, that leads us to thinking about measuring error in judgment more broadly. We know consistent bias causes errors, right?
For like a scale that always reads 5 pounds heavy?
Or that manager who's always way too optimistic about deadlines. Those biased judgments lead to predictable, often costly mistakes.
But noise adds to the error too, doesn't it? It's not just bias.
Precisely. They work together. While the sources don't lay out the exact math formula for us right here, the core idea is clear. Overall error in judgment, often measured by something called mean squared error. It's a combination of both bias squared and noise squared.
Okay, so both matter.
Yes, and here's a really critical insight, maybe the most important one. Reducing bias by a certain amount and reducing noise by the same amount. They have the exact same impact on reducing your overall error.
Wait, really? The same impact? I would have absolutely thought you need to fix the bias first, like correct the aim before you worry about the wobble.
That's what feels intuitive, right? It's a
Yeah.
really common assumption. But the sources argue strongly against that. They basically say reducing noise in predictive judgment is always beneficial, regardless of the level of bias. It always helps improve accuracy.
Huh. So you don't need to wait to figure out the bias.
No. There's this story about Amy Simkin and her forecasting team. Her boss wanted to measure bias first, but the math shows tackling noise is always a win for accuracy.
Fascinating. Okay, let's dig deeper then. Where did this noise actually come from? We mentioned occasion noise earlier, the variability within one person. What drives that?
Well, mood is a big one,
Okay, that makes sense. Feeling good or bad affects decisions.
more than we might think. Research shows even deeply held values can be swayed by a temporary mood. You know that classic ethical dilemma? Pushing one person off a bridge to save 5?
Yeah, the thought experiment.
Studies suggest people in a positive mood are significantly more likely to say they'd actually do it compared to people in a negative mood.
That's incredible. A temporary feeling shifts a moral judgment like that.
Apparently so. And it's not just internal states like mood. External stuff like the weather can have a measurable impact too, often through mood.
Like rainy days and Mondays always get me down.
Sort of, but with real-world consequences. Bad weather might actually improve memory recall slightly. Judicial sentences have been shown to be tougher on hotter days. Sunshine can influence the stock market.
Wow.
And there's even that study suggesting college admissions folks weight academic factors more heavily on cloudy days. the clouds make nerds look good idea.
Huh. Okay. And it's not just these big external things either.
Not at all. Even in super-controlled lab experiments, like memory tests where they try to eliminate all variables,
Aha.
researchers still find that a person's performance just kind of ebbs and flows over time for no obvious external reason.
Just random fluctuation.
Pretty much. And interestingly, often the best predictor of how you'll do on the next memory trial is simply how well you did on the last one. It's this inherent internal variability.
Okay, so that's occasion noise within one person. Now, what about the differences between people? That's system noise, right?
Exactly, system noise, and we can break that down further.
Okay.
One component is called level noise. This is about consistent differences in the average judgment level between different people.
Like some bosses are just generally tougher graders than others?
Precisely. Some supervisors consistently give higher performance reviews. Some judges are just generally more lenient in sentencing, others stricter.
And that obviously creates unfairness right there.
Absolutely. That sentencing audit we mentioned, it showed huge differences in the average sentences judges gave for similar crimes. Things like the judge's background, their beliefs, even where they were located geographically seemed to play a bigger role than you'd hope.
Wow. Okay, so that's level noise, differences in average judgments. Is there more to system noise?
Yes. There's also stable pattern noise. This is maybe even more interesting. This is about how different judges react differently to the specific details of a case, even if their overall average level of, say, leniency is the same.
So like Judge A might care more about factor X, while Judge B focuses on factor Y.
Exactly. It reflects their individual judgment personalities, the unique way each person weighs information and makes trade-offs.
And this pattern noise is significant.
Surprisingly, research suggests it's often the largest single component of overall system noise.
Bigger than the average level differences.
Often, yes. Imagine two doctors. Same patient, same symptoms. Dr. A really focuses on lifestyle factors. Dr. B is more concerned about family history. Even if both are equally competent overall similar level, their different patterns, their judgment personalities, could lead them to different diagnoses or treatment plans. That's stable pattern noise.
It's like everyone has their own unique way of being inconsistent, or at least different.
You could put it that way. And all this underlying noise, both level and pattern, can be masked by what the sources call the illusion of agreement.
Illusion of agreement. Meaning we think we agree more than we do.
Sort of. It means we see a group reach consensus, and we assume everyone arrived there for the same solid reasons. But that might not be true at all.
How does that happen?
Well, think about information cascades in groups.
Cascades.
Yeah. Early opinions, even if they're weakly held or not well supported, can really strongly influence what people who speak later say.
Ah, so people just follow the leader.
Pretty much. They observe others and think, oh, maybe they know something I don't, and they align their own judgment. It can lead to a unanimous decision that doesn't actually reflect the group's best collective wisdom.
Is there evidence for this?
Oh, yeah. That music download experiment is a classic example. They artificially inflated the download counts for some songs, and those songs became genuinely popular purely because people saw they were supposedly popular already. The perception created the reality.
Wow, so it's not just about the information itself.
No, there are also social pressure cascades. This is where people go along with the group view, even if they secretly disagree.
Why?
Just to fit in? Basically, yeah. To avoid looking disagreeable or rocking the boat. Maintaining harmony becomes more important than expressing genuine doubts.
And group discussions themselves can sometimes make things worse, right? Not better.
That's the phenomenon of group polarization.
Okay, what's that?
When a group of people who already lean slightly in one direction discuss an issue, they often end up adopting a more extreme position in that same direction.
So talking reinforces the initial bias.
And amplifies it. That Paris office example. If people initially thought it was a reasonably good idea, talking about it together might make them conclude it's an absolutely fantastic can't-miss opportunity.
And juries.
Juries are a prime example where group polarization can really shift the outcome, making a guilty verdict more certain or an acquittal more definite after deliberation.
Okay, so given all this noise swirling around, are some people just naturally better judges, less noisy?
That's a really important question. And the sources suggest, yes, some characteristics do tend to correlate with better judgment.
Like what?
People who are well-trained in their domain, sure. Also those with higher general mental ability, or GMA. And perhaps crucially, people with the right cognitive style.
Cognitive style, meaning how they think.
Yeah, specifically, being actively open-minded. willing to seek out new information, especially information that might challenge their existing views, willingness to learn and adapt.
What about relying on experts? We tend to trust them.
We do, but it helps to differentiate. Some experts are in fields where you can actually check their accuracy over time, like weather forecasters or maybe doctors in some specialties.
Okay, verifiable fields.
Right, but then you have respect experts. Think art critics or maybe political pundits. Their authority comes more from peer recognition in fields where objective truth is harder to pin down.
And even among good experts.
Even among experts who completely agree on the core principles or doctrines of their field, noise still creeps in when they have to apply those principles to messy real-world cases.
So for someone listening wanting to improve their own judgment, how can they cultivate that actively open-minded style?
Well, one key thing is making a conscious effort to look for information that contradicts what you currently believe.
It sounds hard.
It is. Our instinct is to seek confirmation, but actively seeking out opposing views and being genuinely willing to change your mind if the evidence warrants it. That's crucial.
And that cognitive style piece you mentioned.
Yeah, the sources mention the cognitive reflection test, or CRT. It measures your tendency to override quick, intuitive answers that feel right but are actually wrong.
I like those brain teaser questions.
Exactly. And lower scores on that test tend to correlate with things like being more likely to believe in pseudoscience or fall for fake news.
Interesting. So it's about questioning your gut reaction sometimes.
And being willing to engage in that deeper, more effortful thinking. Seeking contradictory info, being willing to update your beliefs. That's really the hallmark of a good judge.
Okay, this is great. We understand noise, its sources, why it matters. Now, the really practical part. What can we actually do to reduce it?
Right. This brings us to the idea of decision hygiene.
Decision hygiene, like washing your hands.
Exactly like that. It's about preventative measures you take to reduce the germs of noise before they infect your judgment.
Okay, I like that analogy.
The tricky thing, though, is that it can feel a bit thankless.
How so?
Because you never see the specific errors you prevented by using good hygiene. You just get better outcomes overall, hopefully.
Right, you don't see the bad decision you didn't make.
Precisely. But it's still incredibly valuable.
So what are some key decision hygiene strategies?
One really powerful one is using structured judgments.
Meaning?
Breaking down a complex decision into smaller, independent parts or dimensions, and evaluating each part separately based on predefined criteria.
Okay, give me an example.
The APGAR score for newborns is a classic, instead of just a general impression of the baby's health.
Right, they check specific things.
Exactly. Heart rate, breathing, muscle tone, etc. Each gets a score. It forces attention onto empirically important factors and reduces reliance on just a fleeting gut feeling. Less noise.
That makes a lot of sense. Break it down. What else?
Another strategy? Get multiple independent judgments.
The wisdom of crowds idea.
Basically, yes. Average together estimates from several people who made their judgments independently without influencing each other first. Mathematically, averaging cancels out a lot of random noise.
Okay. What about when you have a group that needs to discuss?
For that, the estimate talk estimate, or ETE method, is really useful.
How does that work?
Everyone first makes their own private estimate or judgment. Then the group discusses the issue. And after the discussion, everyone revises their estimate privately again. The final decision might be the average of those second estimates.
So you get the benefit of discussion, but minimize the initial conformity pressure.
Exactly. It helps counter those information cascades and social pressures we talked about.
What about the order things happen in? Does timing matter?
Hugely. Sequencing information is another key hygiene principle.
How so?
Controlling the order in which you receive information can help prevent jumping to conclusions too early. That's premature coherence.
Okay.
And it can reduce anchoring, where that first piece of data sticks in your mind and overly influences everything that comes after. Some structured protocols, like MAP, are very careful about information sequencing.
We often hear about trusting our gut, our intuition. Is there any room for that with decision hygiene?
Intuition isn't useless, but our ability to make comparative judgments is often much better, less noisy, than our ability to make absolute judgments on a scale.
So ranking things is better than rating them.
Often, yes. Ranking options, or comparing a case to similar past cases, can reveal underlying agreement that gets masked when people try to put absolute numbers on things. The example of punitive damages in court cases showed this people wildly disagreed on dollar amounts, but largely agreed on which cases deserved more punishment than others.
Interesting. And taking a step back, seeing the bigger picture.
Absolutely essential. Adopting an outside view.
Meaning,
Instead of getting lost in the unique details of the current situation, deliberately consider the base rates. What typically happens in similar situations? Look at the statistics.
like with that Gambardi CEO example, instead of just focusing on his great plan, look at how similar acquisitions usually turn out.
Exactly. Or predicting a student's GPA, don't just rely on your interview impression. Consider the average GPA of students with similar backgrounds.
You mentioned MAP a couple times, mediating assessments protocol. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. MAP is essentially a very structured way to put several of these hygiene principles into practice, especially for complex evaluations.
How does it work?
You break the decision down into key dimensions or attributes. Assess each dimension independently, often using relative comparisons or carefully anchored scales. You delay overall judgment until all dimensions have been assessed. Then you aggregate those assessments, often using a simple rule, to reach the final decision. It's very systematic.
Okay, so these strategies sound like they can really help reduce noise.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
are there limits? Are some things just fundamentally unpredictable?
Yes, absolutely. This brings us back to objective ignorance.
Right, the stuff we just can't know.
Exactly. Many outcomes depend heavily on chance events or factors that are simply unknowable when you're making the judgment. Think about hiring someone.
Okay.
Their future success depends on so many things: team dynamics, market changes, personal circumstances that you just can't foresee perfectly.
So even the best algorithms, the best decision hygiene, they hit a wall eventually.
They do. While algorithms are consistently less noisy and often outperform human experts in predictive tasks, the performance gap isn't always massive. Because in many complex domains, there's just a fairly low ceiling on predictability overall due to that objective ignorance. Even the best model can only capture so much.
And this links back to understanding versus prediction.
Yes. Just because we can find correlations doesn't mean we fully grasp the causal web. And if our predictions consistently aren't very accurate, even with good models, it might suggest our underlying understanding of the phenomenon isn't as deep as we thought. The Fragile Family study was mentioned as an example where even complex models struggled to predict life outcomes.
This all makes a lot of logical sense. But if noise is so bad for decisions, why do we ignore it so often? Why do people sometimes resist these noise reduction techniques?
Well, part of it is that illusion of understanding we touched on. Hindsight makes everything look obvious after the fact.
I knew it all along.
Exactly. We think the world is more predictable than it is. And we also have a strong attachment to our own intuition, especially when things feel uncertain. We might dismiss systematic approaches if they aren't perfect, clinging to our gut feeling instead.
And I imagine organizations face pushback too.
Oh, definitely. People raise objections. It costs too much to implement these structured processes.
Or it'll hurt morale. People feel like cogs in a machine.
Right. It stifles creativity and judgment, or the feeling that every case is unique and deserves an individualized hearing, not some standardized approach.
And the whole algorithm debate comes in here too, right? Biased algorithms versus biased humans.
Yes, that's a huge ongoing discussion.
Yeah.
If human judgment is noisy and biased, can we design algorithms that are less biased, or at least noise-free, even if they aren't perfect?
That leads to a really interesting question. Is the goal always zero noise? Is that even desirable?
That's a key point the sources make. Counterintuitively, the optimal level of noise probably isn't zero in many situations.
Why not?
Well, for one, completely eliminating it might just be impossible or way too expensive.
Okay, practical limits.
But also, sometimes pushing for absolute uniformity might damage other things we value, like employee morale or that sense of being treated as an individual with unique circumstances.
Can you give an example?
Think about grading student essays. Do we want every single essay graded by a rigid, noiseless formula? Maybe some variability reflecting teacher judgment is okay, even desirable.
Or content moderation on social media. Tricky balance.
Exactly. Or even things like 3 strikes sentencing laws. They were intended partly to reduce level noise between judges, but critics argue they create other forms of unfairness by removing judicial discretion entirely.
So it's about finding the right level of noise, not necessarily zero.
Yes, but, and this is crucial, the sources argue very strongly that the current level of noise in most systems, in most organizations, is far, far too high.
Higher than is acceptable or optimal.
Much higher. leading to massive hidden costs and that rampant unfairness we discussed. So the push should be towards reducing noise significantly through audits and hygiene.
And the guiding principle should be.
The goal of judgment is accuracy, not individual expression.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. Pull together the key takeaways for someone listening to this deep dive.
I think the main message is noise is this really significant, often hidden flaw in our judgment. It's everywhere.
But it's not hopeless.
Not at all. It's often hidden, yes, but it is measurable. And most importantly, it's reducible.
Huh?
We can fight back against it using these systematic approaches, this decision hygiene.
And the payoff for doing that.
Is making decisions, whether as individuals or in organizations, that are more reliable, more consistent, and ultimately much fairer.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Yeah.
Think about the last really significant decision you were involved in, maybe at work, maybe personally. Try to honestly assess how much of the outcome was down to genuine skill, good judgment, accurate assessment, and how much might have been swayed by the hidden, unwanted influence of noise.
Could a different mood, a different expert, a different way of presenting the facts, could that have led to a different outcome?
And what steps, what hygiene measures could maybe have been taken to make that decision more robust, less susceptible to that random variability? Maybe it's time for your own informal noise audit.